Victor Newman had faced betrayals, corporate wars, and attacks on his empire that would have crushed any other man, but nothing compared to the moment he stood in the dimly lit ranch living room demanding, with a voice so cold it shook the windows, "Nikki, where is the USB?" And Nikki, trembling with mascara-stained cheeks and fingers clutching the back of the sofa for balance, finally realized she could no longer run from the truth she had buried for far too long, a truth that had metastasized into guilt so heavy it nearly drowned her every night she tried to sleep, and as Victor's glare hardened into a mixture of fury and heartbreak, Nikki collapsed into a confession so raw it sliced through the silence of the ranch like a blade, begging him for forgiveness, whispering, "Victor, please, you have to understand, I never meant for this to go so far, because the USB wasn't just a missing storage device, wasn't just another corporate artifact, it was a ticking bomb filled with secrets that could dismantle the Newman empire, expose alliances she should never have made, and reveal betrayals she committed in moments of weakness when alcohol, fear, and manipulation clouded her judgment." And as Victor's voice rose, "Where is it, Nikki?" His words cracked like thunder, pushing Nikki into a full breakdown as she admitted she hadn't just hidden the USB, she had moved it again and again, terrified that if anyone found it, the entire family would implode under the weight of what it held. She explained how she had discovered files about a covert power grab, financial shell companies tied to Newman divisions, an encrypted set of recordings implicating not just enemies like Adam and Audra but insiders too, people Victor trusted. People Nikki feared would retaliate if they knew she had seen the contents, so she had lied to protect them, lied to protect him, lied to protect her own sanity as Sheila-level paranoia settled in, and now her voice cracked as she told Victor that on the night she relapsed, the night she disappeared for hours and came home incoherent, she had gone to a storage unit under an alias and tucked the USB into a hollowed-out book, convinced she could figure out what to do with it later, but later never came because the guilt consumed her faster than she could act, and Victor, pacing like a caged lion, snapped that he could not believe she had kept something this monumental from him, could not believe she had risked the family's entire legacy, could not believe she had chosen secrecy over partnership after everything they'd survived, JT, Ian Ward, the stalkers, the schemes, the affairs, the near-deaths. And Nikki sobbed that she wasn't choosing secrecy, she was choosing survival, that she had seen evidence someone inside the family had been monitoring her movements, someone who wanted that USB destroyed or weaponized, and she panicked because if Victor found out prematurely, if she told him before she understood the danger, she feared he would storm into battle unarmed and be blindsided by the betrayal inside their own walls. She insisted she was trying to buy time, trying to figure out who planted those files, trying to uncover whether it was one of Victor's enemies or one of his children manipulating events behind the scenes, because the recordings weren't vague, they detailed secret meetings, whispered threats, and strategies to turn Newman against itself, and Victor, shocked into stillness for a moment, asked in a quiet but deadly tone what exactly the recordings said, and Nikki, swallowing back another wave of tears, admitted that one file captured a conversation involving Victoria discussing potential leverage to take control of specific assets behind Victor's back. Though Nikki couldn't tell whether it was real or doctored, another file hinted at Adam trading dangerous intel with forces outside Genoa City, and a third file, the one that scared her the most, showed a partial audio clip of someone sounding eerily like Nick voicing concerns about Victor's leadership, creating the illusion of disloyalty even though the clip might have been manipulated. And she said she didn't know what was real and what was sabotage, but she knew someone wanted that USB found by the wrong person. Someone wanted to fracture the Newmans so completely that even Victor couldn't glue them back together. Someone wanted war inside the walls of the ranch, not outside. Victor's jaw tightened, eyes narrowing with the ruthlessness that built his empire, and he barked at Nikki to tell him the exact location again, slowly, clearly, because he wasn't walking into another trap, and Nikki, shaking so violently she could barely form the words, confessed that she had moved it yet again last week after receiving an anonymous text that said, "You're running out of time. He'll find out," which terrified her so much she drove to an abandoned cabin near the old Newman farm, lifted a loose floorboard, and hid the USB underneath along with a burner phone she had used to communicate with a mysterious contact she now believed was manipulating her from the moment she first discovered the files. And as she described this, Victor's rage simmered into something far more dangerous, strategic fury. as he realized Nikki hadn't been acting rashly but had been stalked, threatened, and cornered emotionally, and instead of turning to him, she had tried to shield him, thinking she could shoulder this alone, but in doing so she had ripped open the one wound Victor never fully healed from, being shut out by the people he loved most. He stepped toward her, voice lower but sharper, saying he could forgive almost anything, but lying about something that could destroy their children, their legacy, and their future, was nearly unforgivable, and Nikki, sobbing uncontrollably, said she was ready to face any consequence, ready to face his wrath, ready to face the fallout, but she could no longer bear carrying this alone, and she needed him to know before someone else unleashed the truth with catastrophic intent. She reminded him that the files contained timestamps that didn't line up, shadows that suggested editing, and voices layered with distortion, evidence that someone wanted Victor to believe his family was turning on him, someone who thrived on chaos, someone who would profit from a Newman implosion, and she feared the moment the truth surfaced, their enemies would swoop in like vultures. Victor, trying to control the storm inside him, told her they were going to the cabin immediately, that he would retrieve the USB himself, that he would analyze every frame of every file, and that no one, not even their own children, would know what was on that drive until he decided how to proceed. But as he grabbed his coat, Nikki collapsed onto the floor, shaking and begging him not to go alone because she was sure she had been followed the night she hid it, sure someone had been watching her from the woods, sure she saw headlights that turned off abruptly as she left, sure that if Victor went alone, he'd be attacked or ambushed by whoever orchestrated this nightmare. She sobbed that she had fought for their marriage, fought for sobriety, fought against every demon that tried to claim her, but this shadow war over a USB might be the thing that finally broke her, because she never wanted to be the reason Victor Newman lost everything. And Victor knelt beside her, torn between fury and love, lifting her chin so she would look at him, and in that moment his voice softened. "Nikki, you should have come to me," and she whispered back, "I'm coming to you now. Forgive me, Victor, please," and the anguish in her voice cracked something inside him, softening the unbreakable titan just long enough for him to wrap his arms around her trembling body as she clung to him like a lifeline, and he finally murmured that forgiveness wouldn't be easy, trust would have to be rebuilt brick by brick, but the first step was retrieving that USB before the wrong hand struck first, before the files were weaponized, before the Newmans became casualties of an unseen puppet master. And as they stood together, the storm outside rattling the windows, Victor realized this wasn't just a betrayal, it was a warning that the darkest battle of their lives was about to begin, and Nikki, still crying softly, whispered that once he saw what was on that USB, once he heard those twisted recordings and saw the manipulated footage, he would understand why she broke down, why she hid it, why she almost drank herself into oblivion again, because the truth wasn't just damaging, it was monstrous. And if revealed without context, it could destroy every single Newman from the inside out, leaving Victor to stare down the terrifying possibility that the real question wasn't just where is the USB, but who created it, and how long had they been planning to obliterate his family. And as Victor let those chilling questions settle into his bones, the weight of them almost more suffocating than the storm pounding against the ranch walls, Nikki watched him with a mixture of dread and fragile hope, because she knew the moment he stepped out that door, the war lurking in the shadows would finally begin in full force, and she feared he wasn't ready, not because Victor Newman was ever unprepared, but because this enemy was not the usual corporate rival or disgruntled outsider. This was someone who knew the family's pressure points intimately, someone who understood exactly how to trigger rage, paranoia, and mistrust within one of the most powerful dynasties in Genoa City, and as Victor grabbed the keys, his hand hesitating for just a moment, Nikki instinctively reached for him, her voice trembling as she insisted, "Victor, please, you can't face this alone," and for a split second, something flickered in Victor's eyes, a vulnerable flash of recognition that maybe, for once, she was right, but the protective titan inside him surged forward again, and he growled that he had to know exactly what they were up against before dragging anyone else into the line of fire, yet even as he said it, he could feel the unsettling echo of Nikki's earlier words, how she sensed headlights trailing her, how she felt watched, hunted, and for the first time in years, Malcolm of the Mergers, Spear of Newman, the mustache himself, felt a cold thread of uncertainty slip into his spine, and he wondered whether retrieving the USB might be walking straight into an ambush planned by a ghost hiding behind family faces. Nikki's tears, still streaming, were a silent plea as she begged him to at least call someone for backup, but Victor ignored his phone buzzing in his pocket, because the last thing he wanted was any of the children knowing about the USB before he saw the contents with his own eyes. And in that moment Nikki realized the heartbreaking truth that this situation wasn't just about the files, it was reopening every old wound Victor carried about loyalty, about betrayal, about being blindsided by the people he trusted, and she knew that if this USB suggested even the possibility of disloyalty inside the Newman bloodline, Victor would burn the earth down before letting anyone tear apart the empire he built brick by brick with his bare hands. The storm cracked overhead as he opened the front door, wind roaring like an omen across the open fields, and Nikki felt desperation bleed into her voice as she insisted she needed to go with him, that she couldn't sit in the ranch waiting to hear whether he returned safely or whether the faceless tormentor manipulating them would strike again. And finally, when Victor saw the terror in her eyes, not guilt, not weakness, but genuine, bone-deep fear, something inside him softened just enough for him to command, "Fine. Get your coat. But you stay behind me at all times," and Nikki nodded frantically, grabbing her jacket with trembling hands, knowing that whatever lay ahead at that desolate cabin could shatter them even more than the confession she had just made. The drive out into the countryside was suffocatingly silent, rain hammering the windshield in sheets as if nature itself wanted to drown the secrets they were chasing, and Nikki kept glancing at the rearview mirror, certain she saw headlights flicker in the distance before disappearing behind a bend. And when Victor noticed her tension, he asked in a dangerously controlled voice if she recognized any vehicles following them, but Nikki could only shake her head because the shapes were too quick, too distorted by the rain, but her instinct screamed someone was near, someone always watching, always waiting. Victor gripped the steering wheel harder, the gears of strategy spinning through his mind as he replayed Nikki's confession, the encrypted files, the doctored clips, the distorted voices, tools of psychological warfare designed to dismantle trust from the inside out, and he knew that whoever orchestrated this had to be both brilliant and ruthless, someone who not only wanted the Newmans to crumble but wanted them to implode in a way that left lasting damage. When they finally reached the abandoned cabin, the headlights cutting through the darkness like a knife, Nikki felt her breath hitch because the structure looked even more ominous than she remembered, its sagging porch, moss-choked roof, and cracked windows giving it the eerie aura of a place where secrets went to rot. Victor turned off the engine, listened to the storm for a moment, then stepped out with the controlled menace of a man preparing for battle, and Nikki followed closely, gripping his arm as they moved toward the door. Inside, the cabin was cold, damp, and silent except for the rhythmic dripping of rainwater seeping through the roof, and Nikki pointed toward the loose floorboard where she had hidden the USB, her pulse racing as Victor knelt to pry it open. But just as his fingers reached for the hollowed-out space beneath the wood, Nikki gasped because something was wrong. The board had been moved, subtly but unmistakably positioned, and there was fresh mud smudged near the edge. Victor's eyes narrowed into slits as he slowly lifted the plank, and Nikki's heart stopped when she saw the empty space where the USB should have been. Her knees buckled, and she choked out, "No, no, Victor, it was here, I swear, someone was here." But Victor didn't need convincing, because the evidence was right in front of them, undeniable, and more chilling than anything Nikki had confessed, because someone not only knew she had hidden the USB here, but someone had retrieved it before they arrived, someone who had outmaneuvered even Victor Newman. The rage that erupted inside him was volcanic, but beneath it was something far worse, the realization that they were officially one step behind their enemy, and whoever stole the USB now held the power to expose or fabricate whatever narrative they wanted, painting any Newman they chose as a traitor, a co-conspirator, a saboteur. Nikki collapsed against the wall, sobbing that this was her fault, that she should never have hidden it, that she should have come to him sooner. But Victor snapped, not at her, but at the situation, as he growled that the USB being missing changed the rules entirely, because now they weren't just trying to prevent the truth from coming out. They were trying to stop someone from using twisted lies to destroy their entire family. Nikki shakily reached into her coat and pulled out the burner phone she had left with the USB, showing Victor that it too had vanished, and his stomach dropped with the cold, brutal clarity that whoever stole the USB also stole the burner. meaning they had access not only to the files but to every anonymous message Nikki had received, the threats, the manipulations, the timestamps, the proof that someone had been puppeteering this nightmare from the shadows. Victor scanned the room, noticing footprints near the window, muddy and partially smeared but fresh, and his instincts sharpened into laser focus as he whispered, "They were here, recently. Maybe still close," and Nikki felt a chill crawl up her spine, sensing the darkness pressing in from the woods outside, an unseen presence observing, calculating. Then, as if summoned by their dread, a faint sound echoed through the cabin, a soft crunch of leaves just beyond the wall, faint but unmistakable, and Victor signaled Nikki to stay silent as he moved toward the window, peering through a crack in the boards. And though he saw nothing at first, the storm briefly illuminated a figure standing at the tree line, a silhouette cloaked in darkness, watching them with predatory stillness before disappearing into the forest as fast as lightning, leaving Victor to realize with grim certainty that their enemy wasn't just ahead of them, they were taunting them, daring them to chase, daring Victor to descend into the very pits of paranoia and rage they hoped to unleash. Nikki clutched his hand, whispering that they needed to leave before whoever that was circled back, but Victor was frozen in place, replaying the silhouette in his mind, analyzing every possible identity, every motive, every person who could have orchestrated a scheme so complex and personal. Was it an enemy from decades ago? A corporate rival seeking revenge? One of Adam's old associates? A resurrected foe like JT or Ian? Or, the possibility Nikki feared most, someone closer, someone carrying the Newman name, someone playing both sides of the line. Victor guided Nikki toward the door, promising they would regroup, strategize, and strike back with precision, but inside he felt the unsettling shift of power, a shift that placed him, for the first time in years, in a reactive position rather than a commanding one. And as they drove back toward the ranch, Nikki trembling and Victor burning with silent fury, the entire night felt like the beginning of something catastrophic, something engineered to dismantle them piece by piece, and Nikki, her hands trembling uncontrollably, finally whispered the question neither of them wanted to face. "Victor, what if the enemy isn't outside the family? What if the USB was stolen by someone we love?" And Victor's jaw tightened with the kind of grimness that meant he, too, had already considered the possibility and feared that the darkest secret hidden inside that USB wasn't a betrayal, it was the identity of the betrayer. And it might be someone whose destruction would shatter Nikki, shatter the family, shatter everything Newman Enterprises stood for, someone who, now holding both the USB and the burner phone, was poised to unleash a storm more vicious than anything Genoa City had ever seen. Victor gripped the steering wheel harder. The storm outside seemed to mirror the one erupting inside him, crackling with a rage so tightly coiled it could have torn the sky open. Because Nikki's question wasn't just terrifying, it was plausible. Too plausible, and Victor knew that if someone inside his own bloodline had stolen that USB, then the threat was no longer a faceless monster lurking in the shadows but a traitor woven into the fabric of everything he had built, someone who knew the family's rhythms, fears, weaknesses, and history intimately enough to orchestrate a psychological war designed to make him question every single person he loved. And that thought, more than any corporate ambush or enemy resurrection, made Victor's pulse thunder with a fury that could level empires. Nikki sat rigidly beside him, wiping tears with trembling fingers as she whispered that the silhouette they saw didn't look large. Maybe someone leaner, possibly younger, and Victor flinched as soon as the thought formed because there were only a handful of possibilities who matched that description: Adam in one of his spirals, Nick in a moment of misguided moral crusading, Noah lost in pain, or even Victoria if desperation had driven her to darker roads. And each possibility stabbed Victor like a separate betrayal, a separate wound. Nikki whispered that she had seen enough in her life to know when someone was unraveling, someone on the edge of crossing lines they couldn't come back from, and she feared that whoever had taken the USB wasn't acting out of hatred alone but desperation, as if the files on that drive weren't just leverage, they were salvation, a weapon, a shield, or a final push to destroy everything before being exposed themselves. Victor kept his eyes glued to the road, but his mind whirled with memories: Adam's manipulative brilliance, Victoria's simmering ambition, Nick's bursts of impulsive righteousness, and in the darkness he wondered whether someone had been quietly spiraling right under his nose, someone who felt cornered enough to orchestrate a scheme big enough to destabilize not just the family but his marriage, his empire, His life. Nikki's voice shook again as she confessed the part she hadn't dared to say earlier, that one of the anonymous messages she received wasn't a threat, it was a warning, saying simply, "He's closer than you think," and Nikki assumed it was referring to Victor, but now, after the encounter in the woods, after the stolen USB, after the looming dread wrapping around her ribs like ice, she realized the message might not have been about Victor at all, it might have been about the thief, the one watching her, stalking.